Hi, I'm Kurt Doolittle from the Propertarian Institute. I sort of prefer to record these videos with good production quality, but I'm in a hotel in Lviv and I want to put an end to the non-aggression principle discussion, and I thought I would put something together for you. It's also been a while since I've put a piece out. Sorry, I have an awful lot on my plate, but I'll try to increase the number of videos this year. From aggression to non-aggression. Well, criticism can help you identify a problem, but only solutions are actionable. So I'd rather talk about truth because talking about truth advances our understanding of the world and improves our ability to act within it. But falsehoods, frankly, are cheaper to produce than truths, and that's why we produce them. It's much cheaper to produce a lot of false propaganda than to refute those falsehoods with truthful analysis. Now, certain falsehoods are very resistant to refutation. That's because they rely on our cognitive biases. For example, it's hard to convince people that the earth is round when they don't know that. It's equally hard to refute people's intuition that they cannot escape cognitive bias without substantial effort. And it's very, very hard to refute ideas held by people who have invested effort, self-worth, and status, and particularly income, in false ideas. I mean, we want to hold on to those investments. It's logical, right? I mean, we've put a lot of our effort into something, spent a lot of time on it. We feel like we understand and can render opinions and judgments on the world because of them. But, we do that with false ideas just as much as we do with true. So I want to restore truth and liberty to the West because I understand that for historical reasons that only the West can produce truth and liberty, and that the West has been disproportionately beneficial to mankind because we invented truth and liberty. Not that truth and liberty are abstract goods, but because truth and liberty produce knowledge, and that knowledge allows us to sort of pacify ourselves, pacify nature, and hopefully some portion of the universe. Now, I use that term pacify intentionally because what I mean, I'm trying to say transform it to Eden for our use. So when I use pacify, I mean transform the world into something that's beneficial for us. So to restore truth and liberty and the inventiveness of the West for all of mankind, not just for us, there are certain falsehoods and certain heavily invested falsehoods that we need to refute because they hinder the restitution of truth and liberty. It's sort of like a source of ignorance. If you have a really deeply held idea that people really cling to, but that's false, it actually prevents the distribution of truth. So we need to get rid of some falsehoods in order so that we can understand some truths. And sometimes we have to get rid of very sacred truths. I'm sure that we all know the example of Darwin. That was a very hard truth to deal with. I'm sure that the Copernican revolution was a very hard truth to learn to deal with. We often encounter things that are very difficult to reconcile with our existing investments, but that doesn't mean they're not true. And it also often means that there's a great benefit to having greater knowledge about the world that is more correspondent with it, in other words, more true, and less false. We can better pacify the world, domesticate it, whatever you want to call it, and transform it for our betterment. Well, one of those blocking falsehoods, those creators of ignorance that inhibits the advancement of liberty is the so-called non-aggression principle, which is a sort of half-truth, the purpose of which is not to create liberty, but to justify sophisticated forms of parasitism. Now, I realize you're not going to like this if you're heavily invested in it. It's not a matter of whether we like it. I suppose I don't like it either, but it's just true. So if you follow my work, you know about the Enlightenment fallacies. Each Enlightenment fallacy is a group evolutionary strategy, and they range from the Anglo-empirical and its fallacy of the aristocracy of everyone, that's from Hobbes' Locke etc. The French moralist argument, as put forward by Rousseau, which was the equality of everyone and the sort of his state of nature, his approach to the state of nature. The German rational approach, which is the first really obscurant one put together by Kant and the following German philosophers. Kant basically invented a very interesting form of language, not all of which is wrong, but the purpose of which was to perpetuate the hierarchy of the nobility without the existence of the church. So he basically tried to restate Christianity in what we call rationalist language. And rationalist means internally consistent, internally dependent. And so he and the German philosophers have carried this through, and and actually it was his insight that we need to tell the truth is, and the categorical imperative are probably good statements. But the way he achieved it created a technology of deception that's quite unfortunate. This technology was picked up and amplified by the fourth Enlightenment, the Cosmopolitan Enlightenment, or what we call the Ashkenazi Enlightenment or the Jewish Enlightenment. And they produced the second. They produced, just as Christianity was, or the Talmudic monotheism is a sort of first great lie, spread through the Hellenic and Mediterranean transport system through largely women and slaves. We got the second great lie out of the Cosmopolitan Enlightenment, which is pseudoscience. We see that from a whole host of authors: Bose, Marx, Freud, Cantor, although Cantor's forgivable because he's fixable, Mises, who is again forgivable. He was actually trying, he just was a victim of his past. The group we call the Frankfurt School: Horkheimer, Adorno, Fromm, and Marcuse. Little bit maybe Ayn Rand, and certainly Murray Rothbard. There's a host more. I mean, we can take this on forever, but those are the initiators of each of the techniques and each of the different disciplines. And these people were followed by these people advanced the cosmopolitan pseudoscience scientists and pseudo-moralists and pseudo-rationalists. They created this wonderfully obscurant technique of suggestion, and they, which I want to not go over right now because it takes me an hour to talk about that topic in the first place. And that was followed by the Anglo-Neo-Puritan, postmodern, and feminist revolution that adopted those pseudosciences and the techniques and spread them throughout the culture. So the point I want to make about this is that everybody was wrong. The Anglo-empiricists were wrong. It isn't possible to make an aristocracy of everyone, and an aristocracy was always a tiny minority of Europeans, but it had a profound consequence for us. The French moralists, their equality of everyone, that's absolutely wrong. German rationalism Kantianism is certainly wrong, and we've put an end to that, although, again, you need to be a fairly knowledgeable person in the philosophy of mathematics to be able to have a hard reason to understand that, a clear understanding of why that's true. Cosmopolitan pseudoscience, well, it's taken us a long time to overthrow Bose, Marx, Freud, Mises, Rand, and Rothbard. It's been a non-trivial effort. And today's, we've done that by science, and today's problem is that the Anglo-Neo-Puritan postmodern feminist movement is just trying to create reality by chanting. But they're following their group strategy. So each of these cultures attempted to take its group evolutionary strategy. In other words, their local, territorial, cultural mythos and the logic behind it, and to state that man's nature and his nature in the state of nature justified the group evolutionary strategy as good. But none of these groups are really aware that they're engaging in these fallacies. It's, mostly wishful thinking and deception. But other than the gypsies, I don't think anybody, and I'm pretty sure we know this. I mean, even if you listen to what Adorno says, uh, these people do these things out of cultural habits. These logics are available to them. These metaphysics are available to them. Metaphysics is basically your value judgments, the way you accept that the world works or how the world exists. And if you combine your metaphysical value judgments with your cultural methodology for persuasion and coercion, with your with your group evolutionary strategy, you end up just doing that because it's what's available to you. So every culture expresses its ideas within its own cognitive bias. This is why science has been so important for mankind, is because it's actually a language that's closest to the ability to tell the truth, independent of all those cultural biases. Well, unfortunately, we haven't yet solved it, or this is what Propertarianism and testimonialism I'm trying to do with them, is to solve it, is to complete the sciences by making the discourse that engages in the social sciences, the volitional sciences, as scientific as that in the physical sciences. And it turns out we can do that. There are only two substantial bodies of thought for the advancement of liberty. The classical liberal project, under the failed assumption of an aristocracy of everyone, but which the classical liberals did not really understand as a market for commons where trades occurred between the classes. That's what the classical liberal government really is. It's a market. And the second one is the only substantial argument for distorting liberty is the Rothbardian cosmopolitan libertarian. So you have really two cases for liberty: Anglo and the Ashkenazi, or the Anglo and the cosmopolitan. The Anglo was insufficiently understood because it was largely habituated and not written down. Meanwhile, the cosmopolitan was written down as Jewish law. So we have very different ways of approaching our social orders. I want to make sure I'm getting this clear, is that everybody's wrong, right? I mean, everybody's wrong. But we have only two substantial bodies of thought about liberty: the libertine, Rothbardian, cosmopolitan, and the classical liberal, Anglo. And so I write a lot about how to fix the classical liberal, in other words, how to restore a market for the production of commons. But I have to, in order to do that, I have to falsify or end the fallacy of cosmopolitan Rothbardian libertinism, which is not an offshoot of classical liberalism, or correctly, libertarianism. But it's an offshoot of Eastern European cosmopolitan anarchism as it existed in the border territories under the Lithuanian, Polish, and Russian rule. Austrian, I forgot Austrian, the Austrian rule. In other words, Eastern Europe sort of existed as an artificial Crusoe's island created by the large states. And in this border country, they practice minimum control. In other words, there's no normative control, only limited territorial control and taxation. From another perspective, to make it a little more now understanding, a little more clear, let's say it's very close to a large agrarian ghetto. In other words, here you got this land over here; it's borderline anyway. Don't create any problems for us, and let us tax you a bit. So this is not a condition of constructed liberty. It's a condition of granted liberty. And I want to understand that the Rothbardian ethic, like the cosmopolitan ethic, arose in worlds of granted liberty, where just as Crusoe's island is protected by the sea, the ghetto and Eastern Europe are protected by the aristocracy. Protected is a interesting word, but order is created by that. So we have two very different worlds. One in which liberty is constructed by the militia. In other words, the fact that every single man is part of the is a warrior, a sheriff, and the producer, and very often a judge. The knights were judges very often. They dispensed the justice. And we have another where liberty is granted. In other words, you're sort of put in a ghetto, maybe a very large ghetto, and you have freedom within those walls, just like you do on Crusoe's Island. So you have the self-created and the granted. Well, you're not really granted. You don't have liberty if you're free by permission. You have liberty if you're free by construction. In other words, if you did it, you created that liberty. So that's why Westerners created liberty, is really their marshal, and we never had the need for controlling the rivers in our nice wet area the way that they did in the Fertile Crescent. And so we never developed authoritarian structures. In other words, we never had to organize a lot of people around a single means of production. Instead, we had a lot of individuals running small farms, and we all contributed to the military, to the landed production or not. So this is what creates the difference between our culture, other cultures, and the Ashkenazi culture or the cosmopolitan culture. So so anyway, we end up with this isn't wishful thinking. This is just what's necessary, how people must act in order to create a condition of liberty. So let's go through what. So in order to clarify, then, I want to go back to. But it doesn't mean the principle of non-aggression is incorrect so much that it's insufficient. In other words, it's an incomplete sentence. You can aggress. It's probably wrong to aggress against something, but you got to say what. So if I say, so we're going to go through right now, trying to define what is necessary for us to construct liberty, and aggression is part of it, or non-aggression is part of it. So let's go through the spectrum. First, you can choose to aggress against the property and toto of others. This is predation, when you're preying on other people. But you've got to defend yourself against retaliation and often against extermination. This is the usual criticism of the steppe cultures, the raiding cultures. Now, Indo-Europeans started out as cattle raiders, but they found, just like the Mongols started out as raiders, you find out that rule and taxation is more profitable than raiding, and so we developed the aristocracy, culture of aristocracy. Then the second that you go through is you say, well, this is the next one, is you can choose to aggress against the private and common property, but not life of others. We call this thievery, but you will experience retaliation for it. This is the usual criticism of gypsies, their beggar and thief culture. This is a group evolutionary strategy of a small number of people. They're not numerous enough for us to really want to exterminate them too often, but they're numerous enough to be a constant problem. The next, you can choose not to aggress against the life and physical property of others, but you can retain the possibility of parasitic existence through deception. But you will experience retaliation for it when possible, but you can always try to run away or whatever. This is the criticism we've seen of the diasporic Jews, or the culture of the bazaar, be like the shopping bazaar. And the basic idea is expressed in their culture as this, as if you and I agree, then that's enough. Whereas in Western high trust culture, it's if you won't retaliate against me, that's enough. Because we have to, as militia, we have to insure each other, and we have to insure all the property of everyone's property as a group in order to defend it. So in raider culture, or in the culture of herding people, or the culture of migratory merchants, if you can bring in your caravan and trade something and get away, well, there's no fear of retaliation. Whereas if you live in the same territory and you farm the same land and there's no real authority other than us, then you have if you feel like retaliating, you can. And this turns out to be the origin of most of our law, is the desire to stop feuds. Next, you can sort of get to the neutral point where you can choose not to against property in toto, which is anything people demonstrate as their property. And by doing so, it is almost impossible to invoke retaliation. In other words, people won't retaliate against you if you don't give them any reason to. But the scope of what they will retaliate against isn't your choice. It's the scope of what they've invested in, they've spent money on. Now, this is a spent effort on. What they've homesteaded, what they've gained through voluntary transfer, what they've gained without imposing costs upon others. Now, this is an empirical statement, not a rational one. This is just what people do, and it's what they do everywhere in the world. And we don't get to tell people, well, you can't retaliate against me. Well, they retaliate against you. The trick is to not cause retaliation if you want to cooperate with people, lead a peaceful existence. So you don't cause retaliation. The way you don't cause retaliation is not to limit your non-aggression to physical things, but it's not to aggress against anything that they've invested in. And this is why we get into conflict in libertarianism, is because we all agree that it's not aggression, but we can't agree on what. Well, I'm answering what you can't aggress against. And what you can't aggress against is anything anybody's homesteaded or obtained by voluntary exchange. Now, you can make a lot of excuses for this, but you can't rationalize it away. If I and mine creates work to create something, and regardless of what it is, a norm, and you violate it, I'm going to retaliate against you for it. Because norms create opportunities. This is, again, a very deep subject, but the reason we come together in groups is because it reduces transaction and opportunity costs. This is why cities are more productive than rural areas. We higher density, lower transaction costs, lower transport costs, lower opportunity costs. So we homestead opportunities in density. That's what we do. We create opportunities by density, or closeness, or working together, or cooperation, and then we homestead those opportunities, and that's what we call competition. So next, you engage in productive exchange with others, but you can engage in productive exchange with others, but both benefit and not invoke retaliation. This is called trade. But you can't defend your property in toto, private property, or life from those of superior means who wish to deprive you of it. So while you can engage in productive exchange with each other, and not invoke retaliation, that doesn't mean you can defend your property, private property, or life from those others who wish to deprive you of it. Next, you can engage in reciprocal insurance of others and thereby obtain insurance from one another. This is what we get, how we create a condition of liberty, so that you can defend your property in toto, private property, and life from those who wish to deprive you of it, because you have everyone else insuring it just as you're insuring it. There's no insurer of last resort in this model. The reason we develop states is to act as an insurer of last resort. So if you won't insure your property, and you're saying someone else is going to, well, you get one. Now you're going to go down another where you can have private insurance companies. Well, you can, except that multiple insurance companies increase transaction and opportunity costs. So that's why there aren't. That's why we get down to single rules of law. Now, the reason this is important is because you're saying there's either natural law that we must obey in order to cooperate peacefully, or not. And so if there's a natural law, in other words, a single logic by which we can act with one another, interact with one another, cooperate with one another, then it exists. It's a logical thing you just follow, and pretty much property provides us with that. Don't impose upon the property and toto of other people, and impose costs upon it. Don't aggress against it, and we can get along just fine. You do that only by homesteading opportunities and by engaging in fully informed, productive, voluntary transfer that's warranted and free of imposition of cost by externality. So if you insure one another, you can have liberty because you've eliminated and if you insure one another because you under a single logical rule, then you can insure anybody who you interact with on this basis, and every possible matter of dispute is eminently decidable. The flip question is, why would you want to do something other than that which was logically decidable by the non-imposition of costs and others, unless you want to engage in immoral activity that itself destroys the ability to cooperate. In other words, you want to be an immoral person. Last, you can invest your profits from your trade in the common production and trade in the commons in exchange for status, which is translatable to increased opportunity and increased discounts. Or you can invest it in productivity, increased returns. I mean, one of the reasons we invest in a lot of commons is to obtain additional discounts. Again, I always say we're not wealthier than cavemen. We've made everything infinitely cheaper through making each moment increasingly productive. And so when you cooperate for the defense of those commons from privatization, when you create commons and then you cooperate in the defense of those commons and you defend it from privatization and destruction, we call this polity. Lastly, and this is the one that I advocate that sounds anti-libertarian, but I can't prove that it is that you can actively impose property in toto upon others, both to reduce your costs and to improve your returns. In other words, why do you let immoral people be immoral if it's costing you something to be immoral? In other words, if their immorality is costing you both real costs and opportunity costs, why not pacify them? And the usual example I give is, the late Rome, the British Empire, and American Empire. I'm not really giving carte blanche to those places. I'm just saying that those who seek to impose property rights or higher levels of property rights, which means they want to impose greater restriction on parasitism. That's pacification, and as far as I know, that's a moral activity. You're making whether people like it or not at first, it is something else. So non-aggression against property in toto, which is demonstrated property, is sufficient for non-retaliation. Reciprocal insurance of property in toto is sufficient for defense and formation of a polity. Contribution to the commons is sufficient for obtaining compound intergenerational returns, and pacification is sufficient for the expanding evolution of civilization. So let's summarize by saying that the non-aggression against property in toto is sufficient for the construction of a condition of liberty. Now for part 2, let's look at why the NAP against intersubjectively verifiable property, prohibiting only violence, is insufficient for the construction of a condition of liberty. The fallacy of non-aggression. Non-aggression is an incomplete sentence. Now, when you say non-aggression, you have to say what you're aggressing against. If you say I'm aggressing against, I'm only saying physical property, then you can go back to my sequence and say, well, if I'm only saying I'm only not aggressing against physical property, I'm leaving open the ability to cheat, lie, and deceive, and I'm also leaving open the ability to act parasitically on commons, free ride, and damage institutions and norms. And I think this is the entire purpose of such a strategy, is to leave open those I mean, why else would you do it unless you wanted to leave open the potential to lie and cheat and engage in fraud and deception, conspiracy, blackmail? Why would you do all that if you thought that why would you use the NAP against intersubjectively verifiable property, physical things, unless you wanted to preserve it? Well, that's because property is the positive expression of the negative prohibition against the imposition of costs, which reduces our willingness to cooperate and increases transaction costs for all of us and decreases opportunity costs for all of us. So the property may be a good analytical tool for the positive expression, the articulating what it is we insure one another against, but property isn't. Property is the positive expression, whereas what we are really saying is property is the product of cooperation, and cooperation is, in other words, the existence of complex property is the product of cooperation, and what we are really trying to do is make sure we can cooperate, because cooperation is the first commons. So when you get to the problem here is you can't escape this problem of commons. You can't get around it. And what the NAP, Rothbardian NAP against intersubjectively verifiable property, IVP, is really just a scam. It's a scam to circumvent contribution to the commons and leaving open the ability to act parasitically. In other words, it's the same stuff we committed pogroms for. I mean, that's why we did it. But so I'm going to come back and say, well, what are some of the criticisms? The NAP is just a means of rational individual choice. Well, I mean, there's all sorts of really cute excuses here. It's just a guideline. It's just for this. It's just for that. It's not meant to be. Well, I'll tell you, that's a really convenient justification. I'm going to say that's a lie. If the NAP intersubjectively verifiable property, if the non-aggression, physical violence, is just a means of individual choice and not a moral proposition, then why would one choose to avoid moral choices, except to act immorally? Which is my criticism. The NAP was adopted by Rothbard as a half-truth in order to perpetuate ghetto ethics. I mean, I don't think he knew what he was doing. I think he just do what we all do, is he relied on introspection and cultural tradition to determine what was good and right and just. I mean, he certainly didn't, he couldn't have understood all this. If he did, then he's one of the magnificent deceivers in history. It's clear the NAP is insufficient for a personal determination of rational action. It's insufficient for the interpersonal moral decidability. It's insufficient for the political basis of law. It's insufficient for the basis of an anarchic polity, and therefore it's insufficient for the basis of liberty. So it's insufficient for each of these criteria: decision, non-retaliation, economic and political cooperation, and a sufficient basis of cooperation with the formation of a voluntary polity in the absence of the state as a method of decidability. Then what is its function other than to allow one to engage in deceits? So the NAP is just fraud. It's fraud by suggestion. It's beautiful in that, like most cosmopolitanisms, like its predecessor, Christianity and Judaism, and going all the way back to, I suppose, the attempt by the Egyptians, it's just fraud. It's nothing more than an attempt to escape paying the high cost of liberty through the mutual defense of one another's property in toto, from the imposition of costs imposition of costs upon us by our organized application of violence to demand and enforce restitution for these costs. So it's not just the NAP is insufficient for moral action. It's the NAP is an attempt both to justify parasitism by non-violent means and to justify non-payment of insurance and non-contribution to the commons. That isn't liberty. That's thievery. It's a scam. So that's the end, that there's nothing left. You can try to get around this and justify it all you want. So it's not about violence. It's about imposing costs against each other. And it's about imposing costs against each other because If we impose costs against each other, we can't cooperate. If we can't cooperate, we can't produce commons. If we can't produce commons, we can't produce property rights. If we can't produce property rights, we can't produce cooperation, yada, yada, yada. In the end, that's it. There's no way to get out of it. The NAP and violence is a scam. It's a suggestion that a half-truth suggestion that asks, by stating the half-truth, allows you to insert your traditional values for the missing part of the sentence. Well, you don't find the kind of person who says, I'm a libertarian and I'm against physical aggression, running around also thinking he's trying to lie, cheat, and steal from other people. But you do find a lot of people in this world, from a lot of other cultures that have created parasitism as a group evolutionary strategy, practicing just those things and calling it good. Now, you can spin anything good you want. I mean, I suppose you could make cannibalism good if you worked at it. But, frankly, what's good is what creates cooperation. What's bad is what resists cooperation. And it's as simple as that. So liberty. Liberty is not obtained by individual choice alone. It doesn't make any difference what you think. But by the mutual assurance that we will not impose costs upon that which has been obtained by others, by means of homesteading of opportunities and the consequent productive, fully informed, warranted, voluntary transfer, free of imposition of costs upon that which others have obtained by the same means. In other words, you don't do what will cause people to retaliate. You do what will cause people to encourage people to cooperate despite the risks of cooperation. Liberty is produced only when we use the organized application of violence to deny human survival by any means other than that which fosters cooperation. There aren't any free rides. Everyone fights. No one quits. If you quit, then you live by someone else's permission, not by liberty. Thanks a lot for listening to this little diatribe. Hopefully I've put in enough bullets in Rothbardianism of late that we can take the libertarians and move them over into Propertarianism. The primary difference, which is not structural, but this basic issue, which is how is liberty constructed, how can it be constructed, and what do we need to do if we want to construct it. I'm Curt Doolittle. This is the Propertarian Institute. Thanks for talking to me today. Bye-bye.